Welcome back to the Elementals Project, where I, a humble toilet-cleaning goddess and dreamer of impossible dreams, am painting every element in the periodic table as a fantasy creature and bringing you along for the ride. When they're finished, they are going to be a deck of cards that can be used as a scientific memory aid or as an oracle deck similar to tarot. To that end, I've assigned each of them a meaning based on their chemical behavior, and I'm composing a companion book which I post page by page as I write it for my supporters on Patreon. I hope you come join us. Meanwhile, let's talk about Cobalt. Cobalt was named after kobolds, the mine goblins who, according to legend, live in Germany where the metal was first encountered. Now, I should have looked at pictures of kobolds. I should even have made this whole column into kobolds because that would have been a brilliant tie-in. But I didn't think of that until after I'd done them all as gnomes, and I would have been kicking myself for a missed opportunity, but I got lucky. Here are some common artists' interpretations of kobolds. I can totally pretend I intended this from the beginning. Ha ha ha! I designed Cobalt as a gnome, because when designing the different columns in the transition metals, I knew I needed to pay homage to David the Gnome, one of my favorite childhood shows. I didn't get to watch it a lot, mind you, because we didn't get broadcast television until I was 9. My only media was movies on VHS, and at one point we even had a VCR with a broken motor, so you had to lift the top off and manually turn a thing with your finger to get the movie to lower into place for viewing. This is the sort of hardship that made me what I am today. But my grandma did have cable, and I'd visit her for 2 weeks every summer, and I'd stay up half the night, every night, with the little rotary fan tempering the July in Wyoming heat, and I'd watch David the Gnome and Nick at Night, and when HGTV started, I fell in love with composting shows. Good times. Anyhoozles, Cobalt here is a stable element. This surprises some people because we're used to hearing about Cobalt in Fallout, the really, really bad stuff. Which is fair enough. There are 22 radioactive isotopes of cobalt. But none of them occur naturally. All the cobalt in the Earth's crust, which is to say cobalt-59, is not radioactive at all. That doesn't mean it's safe. It's difficult to mine and toxic to smelt. It is only found in compounds, and extracting it from those compounds can be pretty unhealthy. But once it has been extracted and is put to use in its many applications, such as drill bits or pigments, well, you can tell your paranoid friends to stop worrying about your blue paint killing you. All is marginally well. The ball represents radioactivity. Should I add more balls on the ground since there's so many radioactive isotopes? How would that look? Drop me a comment and let me know. There are an awful lot of these guys who are carrying a backpack loaded with a selection of the things that contain the element in the picture. I like backpacks. I was a teen in the 90s, and that was the era of the really big pants and the teeny tiny backpack, and I had some. Well, only one pair of the pants. Those things were expensive, and I lucked into a pair at the thrift store in Vegas when Pike and I were stranded at his brother's house. Long story. But the backpacks, I had a few of those. They were friggin' adorable. There was room in there for maybe a journal and a handful of markers. They were completely impractical, and I loved them. Blue was the obvious choice for Cobalt's clothes. Minerals containing cobalt are blue. Cobalt pigments have been used since forever in glass-making, ceramics, and paint. Even the metal itself has a bluish tint. He's blue, ah-buddy, ah-buddy, ah-buddy. Oh, and it's totally not on the topic of blue, but I would be remiss if I neglected to mention that cobalt is used in rechargeable batteries, and is a central component of vitamin B12, and so much more. Cobalt experts out there, share your knowledge in the comments if you feel so inclined. I am certainly not an expert. I am an enthusiastic amateur. In fact, I never used to have any interest in chemistry whatsoever because it's dry and dense and there's so much of it. It's the kind of thing that's easier to learn in niche form, like If you want to blow things up, you get good at explosive chemistry. If you want to cook, you necessarily learn kitchen chemistry. I've even become more adept at spa chemistry since we bought a house with a hot tub. So I can understand that there are thousands of real-world careers that involve knowing some of this stuff. But to learn it for its own sake just has never appealed to me. Where do you even start? And of course, now I'm like, so stoked to be doing these cards, and I can't wait to use them myself to learn more about the uses and the compounds and reactions, and to be able to remember them because the characters are memorable. I hope. So, Vegas. It was November in 1999, and a few of us street kids decided to go on a road trip in a POS car to San Diego, where we would doubtless find work and frolic on the beach and not have to endure a Colorado winter. I should mention that I was only a street kid because my parents lived in a town I didn't want to go back to because it was boring, and that would have meant admitting defeat in my efforts to be a grown-up, and I was too stubborn and childish for that. I also wasn't making good decisions because round about September I contracted tonsillitis, which I thought was just a cold, and I had no insurance, so I decided to tough it out. My throat hurt, so I stopped eating. I was feverish all the time. I was shedding weight like crazy, and I blacked out every time I stood up. And in this state, it sounded like a great idea to road trip with my friends. We went south first, then west to the coast. Or that was the plan. Actually, we went south, then the car blew a piston outside Flagstaff. The nearest resources any of us had were some family members in Vegas, so we hitchhiked, with all of our worldly goods, as far as Kingsman, where we got picked up by Pike's brother. Laura and Sean ended up getting Greyhound tickets to go home, but Pike and I were stuck in Vegas for a month. A lot of funny stories happened in that month. I got to go thrifting, and I found those big pants I'd been craving. I also found this awesome vintage button-up shirt in shades of pale tan covered in cloudscapes, and I owned it for months before I realized it was also peppered with tiny naked ladies because it was Playboy brand. And there was the day I stood up to tell Pike something and sank to the floor to wait for my vision to return, and when I could see again, he was looking at me all terrified and said, "Your pupils do the strangest things when you do that." And I thought, I'd like to see that, so I went to the hall mirror to see what my pupils did when I passed out. The stupid mirror just went black. Pike caught me as I fell. Thank you, Pike. But he also gave me shit for my logic lapse. For years. All that aside, eventually a random boy in a coffee shop fell madly in love with me and opted to get Pike and I back to Colorado. I fell for him, too. But the whole thing may have been a fever dream. At any rate, he drove us to Colorado Springs, where Pike went home and Joe and I went to little gay Ryan's house, and that night Joe and Ryan took me to the hospital, where the nurses informed me that my fever was 104.6 degrees. They gave me a shot. They didn't take my tonsils. The next day, Joe took me to my parents in that boring old town, and 3 days later he went home, and we called each other every day for 2 months before he vanished, and I haven't seen or heard from him since. I never took his picture. I have no evidence that he ever existed, except that I'm alive. I hope you're out there, Joe. I hope you have a very good life. My mother is convinced you were a literal angel. Isn't that funny? It's funny how much a person changes over time. My mind has been completely turned inside out over the past few years. I used to be an unalloyed extrovert, and my soul would wither if I didn't get to go out for coffee twice a week and schmooze with my homies. But in those days, I had zero interest in sharing my artistic MO with anyone. I wanted my art to just happen as if it had spontaneously come into being, so no one could see the hot mess that is my creative process. Case in point, that leg there. It's not right. It needs to move, because I say so. Anyhow, these days I find that it takes me weeks to start missing personal interactions outside my family, but I definitely want to be sharing my artistic unfoldingness mistakes and all, with the internet and all the peoples therein. The obvious reason for the flippy floppies would be lockdown, but I started shifting polarity long before that. I think cancer had more to do with it, actually. I spent a year not having the energy to maintain personal relationships, at the same time getting my perspective adjusted, so that fear of public embarrassment was eclipsed by the fear of pain. No contest, I promise. So that's my take on my own brain inversion, and while I hated how it happened, it really did have to happen. It's fun to share my process. It might even make other humans more comfortable sharing their less than pristine journeys, artistically and otherwise. Some of us are messy, and that's okay. I forgot to mention that his handle is forbearance. He'll forgive me. I love you so much. Thank you for watching. Like and subscribe if you wanna. Nickel is next. Share your stories, rock your colors, and stay healthy. I mean it. No! Don't die, I need you.
Mom, I have an idea for Rosalia's second weapon.
Let's hear it.
Rose, got the name. I think it was something like Rose's rifle. Yeah, it was Rose's rifle.
Neat.
It's pretty much just a pistol, where instead of using explosions to fire the bullet, it uses implosions.
What? How's that gonna work?
It creates a black hole, which creates an explosion, sending the bullet out, which also, because it's so small, goes away. But it stays for long enough that it pulls the next bullet up to the front.
Oh, no need for cocking. Cool.
Yeah.